He was the most feared man in Seoul, not because he shouted, not because he never had to. Lee Hyun-seok ran a syndicate worth more than most governments. Men rehearsed their apologies before they'd even done anything wrong, just in case, just because it was him. Then one night, a bullet changed everything. And when he woke up, the room was white, the sounds were wrong, and everything was dark. His doctors told the world his blindness was permanent. What they didn't tell the world was that it wasn't. He could see perfectly, he just chose not to say so. Because sitting in that hospital bed, Lee Hyun-seok realized something no amount of power had ever taught him. People don't show you who they are when they think you're watching. They show you when they think you're already gone. So he kept those dark glasses on. He sat still, and he watched. He watched his fiancée, the woman who whispered, "I love you" at charity galas, whisper something very different to his enemies. He's already dead. He just hasn't been buried yet. He watched his most trusted lieutenants divide his empire like a meal they'd been waiting years to eat. And then, in the middle of all that rot, in walked a woman who had absolutely no reason to be kind to him. A black nurse from America, quiet voice, tired eyes, zero fear of who he used to be. She didn't bring sympathy, she brought the truth. And Lee Hyun-seok, a man who had never once needed anyone, started waiting all day just to hear her footsteps in the hall. But here's what nobody saw coming. The people who thought they'd buried him alive, they were about to find out he never stopped watching. Like this video right now. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. And don't go anywhere, because this story is just getting started. The police report said it happened at midnight. Hyun-seok knew it was 11:47 p.m. He remembered because he had checked his watch exactly 3 minutes before the convoy stopped moving. He had been thinking about a contract, a name, a number that didn't add up in a report from his Busan operation. Then the world turned sideways. Later people would call it an ambush. The newspapers would call it a targeted attack on organized crime figures. His PR team would call it a tragic road incident. Hyun-seok called it what it was. Sloppy. Rushed. Someone who was scared and ran out of patience. The first bullet came through the rear window. The second hit the door frame. The third, the one that actually mattered, caught him just above the left temple. A graze, deep enough to scramble everything behind his eyes. Not deep enough to kill him, though whoever planned this had clearly been hoping for the opposite. He was conscious for 4 minutes before the sirens arrived. 4 minutes is a very long time when you are lying in the back of a destroyed vehicle on a Seoul highway at 11:47 p.m., unable to tell if the dark you're seeing is the night outside or something that has gone wrong inside your own skull. He assessed. Left shoulder pain, possible dislocation. Ribs 3, maybe 4. Compromised. Head. The graze, blood tracking down the left side of his face in a way that felt warm and wrong and too fast. Legs, responsive, good. He did not panic. Panic was for people who hadn't spent 34 years calculating the odds of exactly this kind of moment. He had always known this was a possible outcome. He had simply assumed he would see it coming first. He hadn't. That more than the blood was what bothered him. When he woke up in the hospital, it was dark. Not the dark of a room with the lights off. The dark of nothing. The dark of a television that had been unplugged. He opened his eyes. He knew he opened them because he felt his eyelids move. There was no difference. The doctor, a careful man named Park, who Hyun-seok had never met before, and who spoke with the particular gentleness of someone delivering information they had practiced, explained it quietly. The trauma to the optic nerve. The swelling, the words may be permanent, delivered the way men deliver sentences they hope won't be remembered. Hyun-seok lay still and listened. He did not ask questions. He did not react. When the doctor left, he lay in the white noise of the hospital. The beeping, the distant footsteps, the soft sounds of a building full of people trying not to die. And he thought, not about his eyes. About what had happened in those first 4 minutes after the ambush. About who had known his convoy route. About which of his lieutenants had received his schedule for that evening. About the 3 names that rose to the surface of his mind the way bodies rise in rivers. Slowly, inevitably, without apology. About his fiancée, Yoon Seo-yeon, who had been the first person at the hospital, who had cried in the hallway where nurses could see her, who had held his hand with both of hers and said, I'm here," in a voice that was soft and steady, and now that he replayed it from the inside of a darkness nobody knew he was living in, slightly too controlled for someone who had just been told the man she loved might never see again, he thought about the way her voice didn't shake. Professional mourners had shakier voices than that. His sight returned on the 9th day. Not all at once. First shapes, then edges. Then light finding the seams of the curtains in his hospital room at 6:14 in the morning. Gray and cold and the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. He lay completely still. He did not reach for the call button. He did not say a word to the nurse who came in at 6:30 to check his vitals, who leaned close to his face to shine a small light in his eye, who he could now see clearly. Her tired expression, the coffee stain on her left cuff, the way she was thinking about something else entirely. He watched her leave. And in the silence of that room, Lee Hyun-seok made a decision that would change everything. He was going to stay blind. Not forever. Just long enough to find out who had put him in this bed. And what they were planning to do while they thought he couldn't see them doing. He came home on a Thursday. The house had been prepared. Fresh flowers in every room, someone had made sure of that. The staff lined up in the entrance hall the way they always did when he returned from travel. Heads slightly bowed, hands at their sides, perfectly arranged. He sat in the wheelchair and looked at all of them. They looked slightly to the left of his face, the way people look at someone they believe cannot look back. Already, everything was different. Seo Yeon had organized a care schedule. She showed it to his physical therapist on the first day, laminated, color-coded, broken into 2-hour windows. The therapist nodded and said it was thorough. Seo Yeon smiled the way people smile when they've been told exactly what they wanted to hear. The schedule said she would arrive at 10 a.m. every morning. Day 1, she arrived at 10:38. Day 2, 11:15. Day 4, she called at noon to say she was running behind. She arrived at 1:20. She smelled like a restaurant he didn't recognize. She kissed the top of his head and said she'd been worried about him all morning. He said nothing. He was getting very good at saying nothing. On the 6th night, after everyone had gone home and the house had gone quiet, Hyun-seok wheeled himself to his office, locked the door, and opened his laptop. He reviewed 3 months of syndicate financial reports. He found 4 transfers he hadn't authorized. Small amounts. Careful, the kind of careful that takes practice. The kind of careful that assumes nobody is checking because the person who would normally check is currently sitting in a dark room, unable to see. He closed the laptop. He sat in the silence of his own office. A room he had built, in a house he owned, inside an empire that had his name on it. And he felt something he had not expected to feel. Not anger. Clarity. Every single person in this house was performing for an audience they believed was gone. His lieutenants were stealing in careful increments. His fiancée was arriving later each day, her alibi growing slightly more detailed each time, which meant it was being prepared in advance. And not one of them, not one, had any idea he could see all of it. He put his dark glasses back on. He had what he needed now. He needed one more thing, someone he could actually trust. He fired the entire staff on a Monday morning. No speech, no explanation. He simply had Dae-wook, his one trusted lieutenant, the only man whose name hadn't appeared near any suspicious transfer. Hand each of them an envelope, generous. Final. By noon the house was empty. The silence was different after that. Cleaner somehow, like a room after a window gets open for the first time in years. Dae-wook found Naomi Crest through a medical placement agency in Chicago. Experienced. Decorated. 0 connections to Seoul, to the syndicate, to anyone in Hyun-seok's world. She had spent 6 years working high-dependency cases in private homes across 3 countries. Her references used words like relentless and impossible to rattle. She arrived on a Wednesday with 1 large suitcase and a smaller bag she never let out of her sight. She was not what anyone in his circle would have expected. She walked into the main room, set her bags down, and looked around. Then she looked at him, not slightly to the left of his face. Not at the wheelchair. Not at the house or the art on the walls or the view through the floor-to-ceiling windows that made visitors go quiet. At him. Directly. Her voice was even. Carrying 0 performance in either direction, no warmth manufactured for the moment, no careful distance either. I'm going to need a full rundown of your current medication schedule, your last set of vitals, and whatever the previous care team left in terms of documentation. She paused. If there was a previous care team, he said there had been. She nodded once, like that answered something. Then she noticed the tray. Lunch, prepared by the catering service Dae-wook had arranged, sitting on a table 4 feet from where Hyun-seok's wheelchair was positioned. She looked at the tray, looked at the distance between them. She did the geometry of the room in about 2 seconds. Without saying a word, she moved the tray table directly beside him, adjusted the height, and set everything within reach. She didn't make it a moment. She didn't look at him after. She just moved on, pulling a small notebook from her bag, clicking her pen. Okay, medications first. Hyun-seok sat very still. In 34 years, in a life full of people performing loyalty and performing love and performing concern, nobody had ever just moved the tray. He didn't say anything, but something, somewhere behind his carefully maintained expression, shifted. 3 weeks in, Hyun-seok had developed a system. Mornings were for Naomi, medications at 7, vitals at 7:20. She would read through her notes from the previous day, ask him 3 or 4 direct questions about how he felt, and write down whatever he said without editorializing. Then she would make tea, not because it was in her care instructions, but because she had noticed, on day 4, that he held the cup differently than he held anything else. Lighter, like it was the one thing in the room he wasn't trying to control. She never mentioned it, she just kept making the tea. Afternoons were for watching. Seo Yeon had started coming by again, less often than before but with more preparation. Her stories were tighter now. Her reasons for being late had names and locations attached. She had started touching his arm when she talked, the way people touch someone they're slightly afraid of being caught lying to. One afternoon she sat beside him and talked for 40 minutes about a gala she was planning. Venue, flowers, guest list. Her voice was warm and her eyes moved around the room while she spoke, to the window, to the door, to her own hands, and she never once looked at his face. He watched her the entire time. She had no idea. That same evening, Dae-wook sent a file. One of Hyun-seok's senior lieutenants, a man named Kwon who had been with the syndicate for 11 years, who had stood beside Hyun-seok at his father's funeral, had been seen twice in the past week meeting with a rival organization's representative, a restaurant in Mapo. Cash paid, no phones on the table. 11 years, Hyun-seok sat with that information for a long time. Later, Naomi came in to do his evening check. She moved through the routine efficiently, quietly. She was almost at the door when she stopped. "You don't have to tell me what's wrong." She didn't turn around. "I'm just saying, whatever it is, it's sitting in this room pretty loud right now." He didn't answer. She nodded like she'd expected that and left. He stared at the door after she closed it. In 48 hours, he had watched a woman who had known him for less than a month, read a room better than a man who had known him for 11 years had read his loyalty. He picked up his tea. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The file Dae-wook placed on his desk that Friday contained 43 pages. Hyun-seok read all of them. By page 12 he understood what was happening. By page 29 he understood how long it had been happening. By page 43 he understood that the ambush on the highway at 11:47 p.m. had not been the beginning of anything. It had been the deadline. Someone had decided he needed to be gone before a specific date. The attack hadn't worked, so now they were moving faster through different channels, legal ones. Documents bearing Seo Yeon's signature on 3 subsidiary companies he had never authorized her to touch. A medical power of attorney filed quietly with a law firm in Gangnam 2 weeks after his hospitalization. A letter, drafted but not yet sent, to the syndicate's senior counsel, suggesting that given his condition, a temporary leadership transition was not only reasonable but necessary for organizational stability. Temporary. He almost smiled at that word. Dae-wook sat across from him and waited. "She's pushing for the council meeting before the end of the month," he said finally. "Kwon is backing the motion. 4 others will follow Kwon because they always follow whoever they think is winning. And the remaining 3? Undecided, watching." Hyun-seok nodded slowly. Undecided men were not loyal men. They were men calculating which side had better odds, which meant they could still be moved. "Don't touch Kwon yet," he said. "Don't touch any of them. Let them keep moving." Dae-wook looked at him for a moment. "You want them to finish building the trap." "I want them to finish building the trap," he confirmed. That night Naomi found him still at his desk at 11 p.m. She didn't ask questions. She set a glass of water beside him, checked the time on his medication, made a small note in her book. At the door she paused. "I don't know what you're carrying right now." Her voice was quiet. Not soft quiet, there's a difference. "But you've been sitting in the same position for 4 hours and your left shoulder is going to remind you of that tomorrow." She left before he could respond. He looked at the glass of water she had placed exactly where his hand would reach it. He drank it. Monday was cold and administrative. Dae-wook confirmed the council venue, a private room at a hotel in Uedo that Kwon had booked under a catering company's name. Hyun-seok studied the floor plan for 40 minutes. He noted where the exits were, where the screens could be mounted, where a man standing at the front of the room would need to stand to be seen by everyone simultaneously. He was already building something they didn't know they were walking into. Tuesday, Seo Yeon called about flowers. She wanted peonies for the council dinner centerpieces. The hotel had suggested orchids. She wanted his opinion, she said. She wanted him to feel included. He told her orchids were fine. She said she'd think about it. He hung up and went back to reviewing the evidence files Dae-wook had compiled. Financial records, meeting logs, the notarized documents with her signature, and thought about the particular skill it takes to ask a man about flowers while dismantling everything he built. Wednesday, Naomi noticed something was different. She didn't say so directly. She just moved through her morning routine more carefully than usual, slower, watching him the way she watched rooms, taking inventory without announcing it. At the end of his vitals check, she said, "You're not eating enough." He said he wasn't hungry. She said, "I know, eat anyway." She left a plate. He ate half of it, which was more than he'd managed in 2 days. He didn't tell her that. Thursday and Friday were for precision, every piece of evidence organized, every timing confirmed. Dae-wook ran the sequence 3 times until it was automatic. Hyun-seok knew exactly what would happen in that room and exactly when. He knew something else too. Naomi's contract ran through the end of the month. Once this was over, once he stood up and the fiction collapsed, she would have no reason to stay. Her patient would no longer be blind. Her job would be done. He sat with that longer than he sat with anything else that week. Saturday, the night before, she found him at the window at midnight. She didn't turn the light on. She just stood beside him in the dark for a moment, looking out at the city below. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "you already know what you're doing." He didn't ask how she knew something was happening tomorrow. He just said, "Go get some sleep, Naomi." She almost smiled. He could see it, the almost of it, in the reflection of the glass. "You too," she said. She left. He stayed at the window until 3 a.m. The council meeting began at 7 p.m. 14 men in a private room, dark suits, expensive watches. The particular stillness of people who have already decided what they came to do and are simply waiting for the moment to do it. Kwon sat at the head of the table. Hyun-seok noticed that. Kwon had never sat at the head of anything in 11 years. He sat there now the way a man sits in a chair he has been mentally sitting in for a long time. Seo-yeon stood near the window. She was wearing something dark and elegant, and her expression was arranged into something that looked very much like grief, the dignified kind, the kind that photographs well. She had prepared remarks. Hyun-seok knew this because Dae-wook had a copy of them. She spoke for 6 minutes. It was, he had to admit, a genuinely beautiful speech. She talked about his vision for the organization, his father's legacy, the painful reality of his condition, the responsibility they all shared to protect what he had built, in his honor, in his name, until such time as 2 men near the window were nodding. One of the undecided 3 was leaning forward. She was good. She had always been good. That had never been the question. She was midway through the part about legacy when Hyun-seok placed both hands on the arms of his wheelchair and stood up. No announcement, no dramatic pause. He simply pushed himself upright, straightened his jacket, and removed his dark glasses. The room didn't react loudly. It didn't react at all. For about 4 full seconds, which is an extraordinarily long time for 14 people to be completely silent. Then the silence broke in every direction at once. He let it run for a moment. Then he looked at Kwon, directly, steadily, the way he used to look at men who had made serious errors in judgment, and Kwon, to his credit, didn't look away. He just went very still. The stillness of a man who has just understood that the floor he was standing on was never solid. "I can see," Hyun-seok said simply. "I have been able to see for some time." He nodded to Dae-wook. The screens came on. 4 screens, 4 categories. The first, photographs. Seo-yeon and the rival organization's representative at a private dinner 11 days after Hyun-seok's hospitalization. Her hand on the table, his hand near hers, both of them not looking at the camera because neither of them knew it was there. The second, documents, the subsidiary signatures, the power of attorney, the draft letter to the council word for word with her name at the bottom. The third, message logs, timestamps, amounts, Kwon's number appearing 17 times in 6 weeks. The fourth, audio, her voice unguarded in a private conversation 3 weeks ago. "He can't even manage his own meals. He needs someone to move his food closer so he can reach it. This is the man they're all waiting for." The room was very quiet after that. Seo-yeon stood completely still. Then she picked up her bag, smoothed her jacket, and walked toward the door with perfect posture, back straight, steps even, chin level. He watched her go. "You performed beautifully," he said quietly as she passed. "Not cruel. Not cold." She stopped for exactly 1 second. Then she kept walking. The door closed behind her without a sound. Hyun-seok looked around the room at the remaining 13 men. "Now," he said, "let's talk about what happens next." The council meeting ended at 9:43 p.m. Kwon left without being asked. The 3 undecided men stayed. That was enough. For now. On his way out, Dae-wook fell into step beside him. "Kwon's family," Hyun-seok said. "Already confirmed. Nobody touches them." Hyun-seok nodded. The betrayal stopped at the person responsible. That had always been the line. Dae-wook glanced at him sideways. "You okay?" Such a simple question. The kind that shouldn't require any thought at all. "Not yet." Hyun-seok said. But I think I know where to start. Dae-wook looked at him for a moment, then nodded slowly, like he understood something that hadn't been said out loud. He probably did. He didn't go home. He sat in the car while the city moved past the windows, indifferent, continuous, entirely itself. And he thought about 6 weeks of watching everyone around him reveal exactly who they were. His fiancée, his lieutenants, men who had bowed to him for a decade. Every single one of them had shown him something real the moment they believed he couldn't see. And then there was Naomi, who had been real from the very first minute, who had never adjusted her behavior based on what she thought he could or couldn't see, who had moved a tray table without making it a moment, who had made tea without being asked, who had stood beside him at a window at midnight and not needed to fill the silence. He told the driver an address in Mapo. She answered the door in an olive sweatshirt and track pants, mug in both hands, hair up. She looked at him, standing at her door at 10:30 p.m. in his full council suit, and she didn't look startled. She looked like she'd been waiting, but hadn't wanted to admit that to herself. "You stood up," she said. I stood up, back. Books everywhere. A throw blanket on the couch, a lamp in the corner turning everything amber. It smelled like whatever she was drinking and something else underneath that. Just her, just the space she actually lived in. And something about that undid him slightly in a way he hadn't prepared for. He sat on her couch. She sat across from him and waited. He told her the truth, the blindness, the decision to stay silent, what he had seen, what he ran. The parts he would not pretend were clean. "There are things about my organization," he said carefully, "that I would not call ethical." She nodded slowly. "I know." Hyun-seok. She looked at him with that steady, direct look she had, the one that had unsettled him from the very first day. "I'm a nurse, not a child. I knew what house I was walking into. Then why did you stay?" She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he thought she might not answer. "Because you never once asked me to be less than I was," she said finally. "Every person in that house wanted something. Your fiancé wanted an asset. Your staff wanted job security. You were the only one who just, let me do my job, let me be myself." She paused. "That's rarer than you think." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, because he was tired, genuinely tired, in a way that 6 weeks of performance had carved into him, he stopped calculating and just said it. "I waited for you." His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Every morning, I would hear your footsteps in the hall before you knocked, and I waited for that, all day. Sometimes that was the thing that made the day manageable." Naomi was very still. "Hyun-seok, I know what I am," he said. "I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. I'm not asking you to step into something comfortable because it isn't. But He stopped, started again. "I have spent my entire life watching people from a distance, calculating, managing. I never once wanted to close the distance with anyone." He looked at her. "I want to close the distance with you." The lamp hummed softly in the corner. Somewhere outside a car passed. Naomi set her mug down slowly. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. And her expression was open in a way he had only seen once or twice. Always briefly, always when she didn't know he was watching. "I'm not someone who does things halfway," she said quietly. "You should know that before you say things like that. If I stay, I stay. I don't perform and I don't shrink, and I don't look the other way when something is wrong." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking you." Something shifted in her face. Slow, like light changing. "Then I'll stay," she said simply. No performance. No conditions beyond the one she had already named. Just, yes, the same way she had always done everything. Directly, without apology. He exhaled. It was the first time in 6 weeks he had exhaled like that, like something he had been holding had finally been set down somewhere safe. He reached across and took her hand. She let him. They stayed like that while the city moved quietly outside her window. And for once, Lee Hyun-seok wasn't watching it, wasn't calculating it, wasn't managing it from behind dark glass. He was just here, present, visible, seen. And it turned out, after 34 years of keeping everyone at careful distance, being seen felt nothing like weakness. It felt like the first honest thing he'd done in his entire life. And the question that stays long after the screen goes dark: if the most powerful thing he ever did was pretend he couldn't see, what does it mean that the bravest thing he ever did was finally let someone look back?